The living room was swallowed in shadows, lit only by a faint yellow glow from the old lamp near my chair. I sat quietly, the stillness pressing down like a weight I could almost feel on my chest. Nearby, I caught the sound of my son's voice drifting from the kitchen, harsh, cold, and careless. I had not meant to listen, but the door was cracked just enough. His words struck me like cold steel, sharp and cutting deeper than I expected. "He thinks this legacy is his, just waiting to be taken," I heard him say with a sneer. "Everything she built, it's ours now. I'm done waiting for her to decide." The arrogance in his tone made my skin crawl. The son I raised, the boy I stayed up late caring for when he was sick, was speaking with such disdain, with a sense of entitlement that chilled me to my core. He dismissed years of hard work, love, and sacrifice like it was nothing but a check to cash. I clenched my fists tightly in my lap, heart pounding. The shock was suffocating at first, a deep, quiet ache that settled low in my chest. But I forced calm into my voice, body, mind. I refused to crumble in the face of this betrayal, even as the warmth that had defined our family life shattered around me. His voice, full of impatience and greed, was not just a rejection of me, but of everything I had ever given. The memories poured in uninvited, those sleepless nights when I nursed him through fevers, the long hours working double shifts to keep food on the table, the careful savings I poured into buying and maintaining the house we all called home. I thought of the sacrifices I'd hidden behind smiles, the personal dreams set aside to build his future. And now it seemed my efforts were invisible, unworthy in his eyes. I rose without a word, feeling the chill of the wooden floor beneath my slippers as I moved quietly down the hall. I sought solitude in the small study where my old engineering book sat, gathering dust, yet still reminding me of the steady, logical mind that had shaped my life. The room felt like a refuge, a place where I could gather myself away from the sting of his words. Hands resting on the worn desk, I closed my eyes and let the sting of betrayal wash over me, bitter and sharp. This was no ordinary disappointment. It was a fracture too deep, a shift in the ground beneath my feet. The house that once held our laughter and shared dreams now felt like a cold shell, hollowed by contempt. But beneath the pain, a quiet resolve began to grow. Years of discipline had taught me to analyze, to plan with precision. This anger would not consume me. It would fuel me. I would not be defined by his disrespect or his greed. Instead, I would find a way to reclaim the dignity stolen from me, to protect the legacy he so carelessly sought to claim. I opened my eyes, the calm on my face masking the storm within. No rash words, no tears, only the steady beat of a mind awakening to its next mission. My son's betrayal had broken the family's warmth, yes, but it awakened something sharper in me, a determination as deliberate and unyielding as the machines I once designed. Tonight, under this dim light, I understood that the story was far from over. I was no longer just the mother who had given everything. I was becoming the strategist, the planner, a quiet force preparing to restore justice. The sting of humiliation would not be the final chapter. It was only the beginning. The quiet of the house wrapped around me as I sat alone in my study. The familiar clutter of engineering books and faded photographs, a stark contrast to the storm churning inside. My fingers hovered over the photograph on the desk, a snapshot of a younger me standing proudly in front of the house I had built through years of toil. That image, so full of hope despite weariness, reminded me of the life I had forged out of sacrifice and determination. Those sacrifices were woven into the fabric of my story. After my husband's death, the weight of responsibility fell squarely on my shoulders. No longer was I simply a wife and mother. I had become the sole provider, defender, and architect of our future. Days blurred into nights as I balanced long hours at the factory with the endless tasks of home and family. The blueprints I once studied during daylight now merged with bills and schedules in my mind, each demanding equal attention. Every penny was hard-won. I worked double shifts, sometimes more, to keep food on the table and ensure the roof did not cave under the stress of unpaid debts. The garden, now wild and unkempt, had once been my sanctuary, where I found solace in the quiet growth of life, despite the exhaustion dogging my every step. Personal dreams, vacations, new clothes, rest were luxuries I relinquished without a second thought, all for them. And for all those years of tireless effort, the boy I rocked through fevers, the child I nurtured, the young man I supported, spoke of it like it was nothing, a legacy owed, a birthright ready to be claimed without merit or gratitude. His words cut me deeper than any blade. The disdain in his voice was a rejection not merely of me, but of the very essence of the life I had built for us both. I swallowed the lump in my throat, refusing the sting of tears. Resentment simmered, but beneath it, a cooler fire began to spread. I would not be defined by anger or sadness. I had spent a lifetime troubleshooting complex systems, diagnosing flaws invisible to the untrained eye. Loss and hardship had taught me the value of patience and precision. Now, these traits would be my shield and weapon. My son, a financial advisor, prided himself on his quick calculations and bold moves, but in his arrogance lay a fatal error: his inability to appreciate the slow, steady work that true inheritance required. He expected shortcuts, instant returns, as if the foundation I had laid was just a stopgap to his gain. But I had learned that every machine, every system, no matter how powerful, depended on careful calibration and balance. I reflected on the signs I had missed, the vague excuses when money was asked for, the increasing avoidance of direct questions about his plans, a subtle shift in tone when discussing family finances. They were clues, now pieces of an emerging puzzle. He was not just careless but cunning, assuming I would eventually relinquish control. That assumption was his undoing. With growing clarity, I began mapping the landscape of our family's finances in my mind: accounts, investments, debts. Like a machine investigation, I searched for inconsistencies, vulnerabilities. Where did the pressure show? What weaknesses could be exposed? My hands instinctively began to sketch diagrams on the notepad beside me, lines connecting data points, pathways of influence. Anger gave way to resolve. I was no longer a passive observer, but an engineer of my own justice, designing a plan that would safeguard my dignity and legacy. This was not about vengeance. It was about restoration. Justice demanded patience, strategy, and irrefutable proof. It demanded a plan that could not be undone by whim or spite. I thought about allies, trusted professionals who could offer guidance and support. My old colleagues who respected my integrity and understood discretion. An attorney whose knowledge of family and financial law would be invaluable. Discreet investigators who could corroborate suspicions without fanfare. Together, they could form the framework of a robust defense. A quiet confidence settled over me as ideas crystallized. I was a woman transformed. The weary mother clung to memory no more. Instead, the strategist awakened, a woman whose calm exterior concealed a mind sharpened by decades of experience and hardship. The coming days would demand every ounce of patience and intellect I possessed. Between the moments of reflection, flashes of the past surfaced. Those countless evenings balancing ledgers after bedtime stories. The meticulous budgeting of groceries and utilities, the triumph of securing the house despite all odds. These memories were no longer mere recollections, but pillars of strength, reminders of the rootedness that could not be shaken by empty words. As dawn crept through the window, softening the edges of the long night, I realized that I stood at the threshold of a new chapter. The narrative of sacrifice and silent endurance was giving way to one of deliberate action.
I would meet deception with clarity, entitlement with reason, betrayal with calculated resolve. This journey would not be easy, nor free from pain, but I understood now that my worth, my legacy, and my dignity were not vulnerable to the whims of others. They were anchored deep within the life I had built, with patience, love, and unyielding strength. And with that, I faced the future not as a victim, but as a force quietly gathering power. The house around me remained still, but inside, the gears of a new plan were already turning, steady, precise, and unstoppable. Several days later, as I sifted through the family's financial records with the careful eye honed by decades of engineering work, a subtle but critical detail caught my attention. A signature, faint and slightly askew, on a contract buried deep within the documents. My heart gave a small jolt, but my face remained calm and unreadable. Someone had forged it, changing key details to shift ownership stakes prematurely in favor of my son, without my knowledge or consent. That single forged document was a quiet declaration of intent, a betrayal I could no longer ignore. The cold reality settled over me with undeniable force. This was no longer a mere matter of hurt feelings or family discord. It was deliberate manipulation, a covert assault on everything I had devoted my life to building. The weight of that realization settled heavily, but I met it with the steady resolve I had cultivated through years of hardship. I reached out to an old friend, a lawyer who had been a constant fixture in my life's most complex moments. Our meeting was terse but profound. As I laid out the evidence, her eyes sharpened, reflecting the seriousness of the situation. Together, we began to chart a course through the labyrinth of legal protections and options, carefully planning how to safeguard my interests without revealing more than necessary. Her steady presence was a balm, turning a chaotic threat into a manageable challenge. Simultaneously, I contacted a retired engineering colleague, someone I trusted implicitly. Though years removed from the factory floor, he had transitioned into cybersecurity, honing skills in tracking digital footprints and uncovering hidden manipulations. His promise of discretion and expertise felt like an unexpected yet vital weapon in my arsenal. Between legal counsel and cyber insight, I was arming myself with tools for a battle fought not with force, but with precision and knowledge. Every evening, I returned to my desk, piecing together fragments of a tangled puzzle. The forged contract was just one component in a web of deception. As I delved deeper into bank statements, investment transactions, and tax returns, a pattern began to reveal itself. Unauthorized transfers slipped under the radar, debts incurred without my knowledge, and suspicious discrepancies that suggested reckless financial gambits intended to destabilize the family's assets. Like a complex machine, the family's financial network depended on every part functioning properly. Small flaws, overlooked and shrugged aside, could cascade into systemic failure. My engineering mind instinctively recognized this fragile balance. The small fissures surfaced in faint yet telling irregularities. Silent sabotage masked as routine transactions. It became clear I was not the only one sensing the unease beneath the surface. Whispered conversations and subtle exchanges during family gatherings hinted at growing suspicion. The family I had sought to nurture was fracturing, pulled apart by my son's relentless entitlement and schemes. The bonds once strengthened by shared history were now strained, fragile as thin ice beneath heavy footsteps. Aware of the delicate social dynamics, I moved with caution and calculation. I rehearsed my approach in my mind, considering the reactions of each family member, anticipating objections, and planning how best to reveal the ugly truths without inflaming conflict unnecessarily. The internal politics were as complex as any technical challenge I had faced, demanding patience and diplomacy. Amidst these cold calculations, memory surfaced, fragile fragments of better times. The weight of my son's first steps, the light in his eyes as he graduated, the quiet hopes I had nurtured for his future. These memories tempered my resolve. The battle ahead was not only practical, but deeply personal. It was not vengeance I sought, but restoration, an opportunity to confront betrayal while holding the door open to a possibility of healing. My investigations pressed on, employing not only financial scrutiny, but the systemic thinking that had defined my career. The family's wealth was a complex structure, and I was methodically dissecting its foundations. Every nuance mattered. Every anomaly was a clue to the underlying forces at work. One night, a detailed report arrived from a private investigator I had engaged quietly. His findings confirmed my worst fears. Multiple instances of forged signatures, unauthorized financial agreements, and subtle threats aimed at silencing family members who might resist my son's plans. The clinical professionalism of his report contrasted starkly with the fire burning deep inside me. I cataloged each piece of evidence, considering the strategic implications. This was no longer speculation, but irrefutable proof, a foundation upon which to build my case. The need for careful but decisive action was urgent. Organizing this information alone filled my waking hours and haunted my restless nights. I forged a plan that balanced exposure with caution, to shed light on deceit without fracturing my family beyond repair. My calmness became my greatest strength. Anger was momentary, logic lasting. Few outside that inner circle grasped the depth of betrayal, or the quiet strength mounting behind measured steps. When the next family meeting came, I would appear armed not with accusations, but with facts and clarity. Though painful, this fight would not dismantle my life's work or legacy. The steady accumulation of proof and plan-making became both my safeguard and my sanctuary. The son who believed he had already won had underestimated the power of patience and intellect. Beneath my composed exterior, the gears of justice turned relentlessly, building toward a reckoning. Years of sacrifice, quiet endurance, and sharp reasoning had prepared me for this moment. The road ahead was difficult, but I welcomed the challenge, with measured resolve, unwavering focus, and a mind honed to outmaneuver betrayal's insidious grasp. The quiet determination that coursed through me in those long evenings of investigation became the backbone of my next steps. I knew this was no longer just a battle of wills within the family. It was a war fought in ledgers and legal documents, in whispered conversations and unseen alliances. I resolved to use every tool at my disposal, every bit of knowledge and every trusted connection, to construct a fortress around my legacy and dismantle the scheme threatening it. My first move was to expand my circle of trusted counsel. The lawyer I had contacted was invaluable, but I knew that no single perspective could fully uncover the complexity of this betrayal. Drawing on years of personal and professional relationships, I reached out carefully to former colleagues, people whose expertise I trusted implicitly. Among them was an old friend skilled in financial forensics, a detective of numbers and anomalies, someone whose keen eye I would rely on to detect the faintest traces of fraud. His discretion was as vital as his proficiency, and he agreed to assist without hesitation. Together, we embarked on what I came to think of as a slow unmasking. Every financial record, every contract, every bank statement became a piece of the complex system I needed to decode. The house I lived in, once a simple sanctuary built through love and sweat, now felt like the control center of a strategic operation. I memorized patterns of spending and borrowing, traced the flow of investments with the precision of an engineer piecing together a blueprint. Where were the irregularities? Which accounts had been touched without my knowledge? Were there hidden loans or liens that risked undermining everything? There were more than a few. Small missteps, overlooked debts, sudden large withdrawals. Each raised flags that demanded investigation. As I cataloged the findings, I noticed a pattern emerging. Weak points deliberately targeted, financial routes exploited quietly to strain my position. It was as if the son I had raised and trusted was pulling levers designed to tighten his grip on the family's wealth, constricting it with calculated pressures. At the same time, I began consulting with a network of former engineering associates, tapping into their vast experience with system security and data protection. The world had evolved beyond simply signing papers and handing over ledgers. Information was now stored digitally, webbed through cloud systems and bank servers. My colleague with expertise in cybersecurity became an essential ally as we worked to detect unusual login patterns, unauthorized access attempts, and attempts to erase or alter data. Technology, once an obstacle I faced in my retirement, had become a vital battlefield where critical moves were made in silence. The combination of sharp legal insight, financial forensic expertise, and digital sleuthing started to form a web of evidence that was both intricate and unassailable. I learned to appreciate that the complexity of family finances required the intertwining of these disciplines. Alone, each piece might have seemed isolated, but woven together, they constructed an undeniable narrative of exploitation and deceit. Meanwhile, in the quiet spaces of the house and in the moments I snatched between investigations, I mentally prepared for the social theater that would inevitably follow. Family meetings, the gatherings where appearances masked simmering tensions, would be crucibles for exposing lies. I knew my son would be defiant, his arrogance a shield against accountability. But I could use that arrogance against him, leveraging it to reveal cracks in his facade. Like a chess player, I anticipated moves and countermoves, social maneuvers I would orchestrate to isolate him. I also began reaching out quietly to other family members, those who harbored doubts but had remained silent, perhaps out of fear or confusion. I needed allies, people whose voices could support truth when the time came. Conversations were careful and measured, revealing enough to confirm suspicions, but never so much as to reveal my entire hand prematurely. Trust was fragile in these moments. I nurtured it delicately, ensuring that those who stood with me felt valued and protected. Visits to the family home and events became subtle stages for planting seeds of doubt, controlled disclosures that raised questions without direct accusations. At times, I allowed myself to observe my son from a distance as he navigated these moments, his frustration often slipping into impatience or thinly veiled anger. It was a form of evidence in itself, a window into his unraveling composure. Parallel to these social engineering efforts, I took practical steps to secure critical assets. I instructed my lawyer to initiate the process of freezing particular accounts and reviewing titles and deeds associated with the family properties. Each action was measured, designed to protect my position without provoking immediate confrontation or panic that might trigger rash retaliation. It was a careful dance, but one necessary to maintain the upper hand. I also arranged for a discreet audit of all outstanding debts and liabilities associated with the family holdings. This process revealed uncomfortable truths: unauthorized loans taken without my consent, obligations that risked jeopardizing the financial stability my son claimed to be protecting. These discoveries fueled my resolve. If deception was the weapon he chose to wield, then transparency and truth would be my armor. There were moments in the midst of this strategy when fatigue threatened to overwhelm me. The weight of years, of loss, sacrifice, and relentless responsibility pressed heavily on my shoulders. Yet I drew strength from the knowledge that every step I took was an act of reclaiming my identity and dignity. I was no longer the quiet mother whose boundaries were ignored. I was an architect of justice, a guardian whose intellect and perseverance would not be denied. As months passed, the painstaking process began to take shape as a comprehensive strategy composed of legal, financial, and social mechanisms. It was layered, ensuring that no single point of attack could dismantle the whole effort. Each revelation, each controlled disclosure, was like tightening a carefully calibrated mechanism, building pressure and highlighting vulnerabilities, all while maintaining the appearance of measured patience. My son's world started to shift beneath his feet. The confidence that once seemed unshakable showed cracks as whispered concerns about finances, investigations, and family loyalty spread. He confronted me at times, his tone sharp, his eyes challenging, but I met those moments with calm deflection and rational discourse. His arrogance, which had long been a barrier, now became a liability as he stumbled in the face of proof and quiet resolve. Others in the family, sensing the shift, began to pick sides, alliances forming subtly yet unmistakably. The power dynamics I had long felt slipping away were slowly recalibrating. Observing this change through my lens of systematic analysis, I realized that the intangible forces of respect and trust, while fragile, were far from lost. They simply awaited reawakening. In the home where memories of warmth once thrived, the atmosphere grew charged with tension and expectation. Yet I remained steady, rooted not in emotion but in clarity of purpose. The battle was no longer about what was taken, but about what could be restored: justice, dignity, and the legacy of a lifetime of sacrifice. Each step was deliberate, a careful calculation informed by years of engineering discipline and quiet courage. The path ahead remained challenging, fraught with emotional and legal complexities, but the foundation was strong. My plan was no longer just a hope, it was a carefully constructed reality moving inexorably toward its conclusion. With every meeting scheduled, every guarded conversation had, every document secured, I edged closer to a reckoning, poised to restore balance. In this intricate dance of strategy and patience, I was becoming not just the protector of my past, but the architect of a future where justice prevailed. In the silence of my home, surrounded by the accumulated weight of years and memories, I finally felt a quiet confidence, a calm in the storm, a resolve as measured and precise as the machines I once designed. My mind was sharp, my purpose was clear. The war for my legacy had entered its decisive phase, and I was prepared to meet it with unwavering strength. The first move in what I now thought of as the execution phase came quietly but decisively. Once the legal framework was in place and my allies around me were prepared to act, I gave the nod to begin freezing the suspect accounts. It was a necessary strike, one that sent a clear message not only to my son, but to the rest of the family and anyone watching the shifting tides of power. The first move in what I now thought of as the execution phase came quietly but decisively. Once the legal framework was in place and my allies around me were prepared to act, I gave the nod to begin freezing the suspect accounts. It was a necessary strike, one that sent a clear message not only to my son, but to the rest of the family and anyone watching the shifting tides of power. The financial leverage he had so dependently leaned on was suddenly constricted, a subtle but crippling pinch on his short-term control. I orchestrated these actions with the same meticulous care that had defined my entire journey: precise timing, minimal exposure, and an awareness of how each step would ripple through the family. It was no small task to balance assertiveness against the risk of escalation, to make moves that weakened his position without igniting open conflict too soon. When the news began to leak in subdued whispers at family gatherings, the impact was palpable. The son who had once swaggered through rooms like he owned them now wore a mask of confusion and thin-veiled frustration. I watched silently as he struggled to maintain composure, his sharp tongue dulled by the sudden loss of his assumed financial freedom. He confronted me once, eyes blazing with defiance. "You think these tricks will stop me?" he spat, as if clinging to a fading illusion of control. But I met his challenge not with fire, but with a steady calm that unsettled him further. "This isn't about tricks," I said quietly. "It's about ensuring that what is rightfully mine, and ours, is protected. You misjudge patience and strength." Over time, I saw the cracks in his facade grow wider. His impatience turned to desperation, and desperation to reckless decisions.
I noted each misstep with clinical detachment, aware that his unraveling was both inevitable and necessary. The family began noticing subtle shifts in power, the quiet rearrangement of influence as trust turned away from deceit. Around dinner tables and hushed conversations, the whispers grew louder. Family members once reluctant to voice suspicion now exchanged knowing glances. Accusations hung unspoken in the air, waiting only for the right moment to find voice. My network of quietly loyal relatives provided crucial moral support. They recognized the truth behind the turmoil and drew closer, their subtle encouragement strengthening my resolve. I maintained my composure throughout this shift, aware that any hint of emotional faltering could be exploited. Conversations with other family members were measured, each exchange carefully constructed to affirm boundaries and reveal guarded truths without provoking defensiveness. I was conscious that I was no longer reacting, but steering the course. When my son attempted to corner me during one of these gatherings, seeking to regain lost ground, I deflected with quiet firmness. "This isn't a battle of wills," I reminded him, eye steady. "It's a matter of justice and respect." His fury was tempered, just enough to silence him, but behind his eyes I saw the retreating storm. I knew this balance was precarious. One wrong move could tip everything into chaos. But the way forward was clear. Through steady pressure and indisputable facts, I dismantled the foundation of his claims bit by bit, exposing the cracks he had hoped to conceal. Parallel to these personal confrontations, I took pragmatic steps to further constrain his influence. Critical assets, properties, investment portfolios, accounts were systematically reviewed, titles confirmed, and debts addressed. My lawyer coordinated a legal tightening around these holdings, preventing further unilateral actions that could jeopardize the estate. During this time, I also brought in auditors, professionals who could comb through records with forensic precision. Their reports uncovered hidden liabilities and discrepancies that strengthened my case against reckless management and unilateral decisions. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became how carefully he had constructed a house of cards, relying too heavily on borrowed trust. These efforts had effects beyond the financial. The family dynamic, once frayed almost beyond repair, began to tentatively realign. Some members who had once been passive or indifferent stepped forward, emboldened by the clarity of the situation and the promise of restored fairness. Others, caught between loyalty and truth, wavered and weighed tribes with increasing uncertainty. I observed all of this through the lens of an engineer. Systems failing, forces opposing, threads unraveling and rewiring. Human relationships, I realized, were as delicate and complex as the machines I had once cared for. They required maintenance, trust, and careful calibration to thrive. At the same time, I employed social strategies familiar to those who understand human psychology. In family meetings, during coffees with relatives, at weddings and casual get-togethers, I planted subtle truths. Controlled reveals that whetted curiosity, seeded doubt, and prompted quiet reflection. I avoided outright confrontations in public, understanding that the power of suggestion often carried more weight than spoken accusations. I wove a network of conversations, sometimes direct, often oblique, that turned attention to questionable decisions without naming names. People began to talk, to question, to reevaluate. It was a slow, steady erosion of his standing, an invisible but growing tide. When faced directly, I refused to engage in blame or recrimination. Instead, I spoke firmly of principles, honor, fairness, responsibility. This approach disarmed critics and limited the damage his defensiveness could cause. My calm and deliberate words contrasted starkly with his increasingly erratic outbursts. I also remained vigilant against attempts to isolate me socially or undermine my credibility within the family. Each such move was anticipated and countered by nurturing networks of support, fostering alliances built on mutual respect and shared values. The strength of these bonds, though quiet, grew in importance by the day.
Though the confrontation was far from over and the burden weighed heavily on me, I found renewed energy in the progress made. Each measured action, each confirmation of facts, each loyal ally gained brought me closer to reclaiming control and justice. The fire that had once burned fiercely in my chest had become a steady flame, patient, unwavering, and powerful. The son who once believed himself untouchable now found his influence diminishing, his plans unraveling under the careful pressure applied at multiple fronts. The battle was no longer a secret skirmish, but a gathering storm ready to break. Yet amidst these turbulent shifts, I remained grounded. My strength lay not only in the strategy, but in the quiet dignity I maintained, steadfast and unshaken. Every decision was a step toward restoring not just the family's wealth, but its honor, the legacy built on sacrifice and love. As the first waves of change rippled through our lives, I understood that the true victory lay ahead, not in immediate defeat or humiliation, but in the slow, deliberate reestablishment of balance and respect. I was no longer the quiet observer, but the careful conductor, orchestrating a symphony of justice that would echo far beyond this moment. In the depth of the night, as the house settled around me, I embraced the calm assurance that my plans were unfolding. The pieces were moving into place, the path becoming clearer. I was ready to face whatever came next, not with fear or rage, but with the unwavering resolve of a woman who had dedicated her life to building, protecting, and, now, restoring. The night the family gathered in the long room felt electric with a tension I had carefully nurtured to a precise pitch. The grand space, with its heavy curtains and polished wood, had witnessed decades of celebration and quiet moments, but tonight it bore a weight almost tangible, as if the air itself were thick with anticipation and unspoken truths. Crowded around the polished table were faces marked with a mixture of curiosity, caution, and unease. Whispers ceased as I cleared my throat, feeling the burden of every sacrifice that had led me to this moment settle firmly on my shoulders. I began without hesitation, my tone measured, the years of preparation crystallizing into a calm authority. "There are truths that our silence cannot protect any longer," I said, letting the assertion hang in the heavy air before unfolding the documents I had spent months gathering. The meticulous reports, signatures verified by experts, and detailed financial records now lay exposed before the family like the schematic of a machine whose inner workings had been compromised. One document detailed the forged contracts, altered, unapproved shifts in ownership that had been disguised beneath layers of legalese but bore the unmistakable mark of intentional deceit. Bank statements revealed unauthorized transfers, deaths accrued without my consent, financial manipulations engineered to erode the foundation of our family's hard-earned legacy. Each paper laid out with the precision I had learned from years spent analyzing complex systems, nothing left to chance or ambiguity. I watched expressions transition from shock and denial to growing understanding. Among the crowd, my son's features hardened, his initial fury rising like a tempest threatened to break free, but I met his gaze steadily. "This isn't slander or fiction," I said, voice firm but free of bitterness. "These are facts. Truth is not subject to anger or denial." His protests, loud and desperate, echoed through the room, but their force waned as I addressed each point with calm, unwavering clarity. The family, once a cohesive unit, now found themselves confronted with fractures that had long been masked by unspoken fear and silence. Witnesses emerged slowly, relatives who had seen irregularities yet withheld voice until they felt empowered by the evidence I presented. Their statements, careful and resolute, shattered the protectiveness that had once surrounded deceit. I maintained steadiness, knowing that my strength came not from emotion, but from moral authority and the undisputed proof amassed by years of unbroken vigilance. This was not simply an argument over possessions. It was a reclamation of dignity, respect, and the legacy my husband and I had worked a lifetime to build. As the tide of truth rose, my son's defiance crumbled, his bravado eroded by the undeniable facts laid bare before all. His privileges, once unquestioned, were now under siege by the very evidence of betrayal he had hoped to conceal. In this moment of reckoning, the son I had known, and who had wounded me deeply, stood diminished, exposed. Silence fell heavy over the gathered family, filled with the weight of realization and the cold sting of betrayal. Yet amidst it, faint threads of hope unfolded. Some members, previously silent or hesitant, found courage to voice their acknowledgement, bringing a fragile but important sense of unity back to the room. When the formalities ended and the meeting disbanded, I stepped into the night's cool embrace. Above, stars gleamed with timeless indifference, their constancy a stark contrast to the turbulent human struggles below. I breathed deeply, tasting relief and the sobering gravity of what had been accomplished. The aftermath unfolded with deliberate intention. Legal structures were fortified, accounts audited and clarified. The family's finances, once vulnerable, began the slow path to security and transparency. Relationship fractures, though deep, saw tentative efforts at healing, built on the fresh ground of truth and accountability. Within me, the fire that had once burned with raw pain softened into a steady, guiding flame, the quiet assurance of a justice hard-won and firmly anchored. The legacy I had fought to protect stood renewed, more than a sum of assets, a testament to years of sacrifice, endurance, and unwavering resolve. Reflecting on this journey, I understood the vast distance traveled, from silent sacrifice to fortitude in confrontation, to the meticulous orchestration of truth's revelation. The scars left behind were marks of battles waged and boundaries redrawn. Healing would take time, but the foundation was real and lasting. In the sanctuary of my reclaimed home, I whispered a personal affirmation, one that had carried me through every harsh moment. My worth was never theirs to claim, diminish, or deny. It was mine, shaped by hardship, preserved by wisdom, and regained through steadfast courage. This victory marked not an end, but a beginning, a chance to rebuild not just material wealth, but the fragile fabric of trust, respect, and family bonds. My story spoke of endurance, of the quiet power in persistent love, and the profound justice achievable through patience and intellect. Beneath the quiet sky, surrounded by memories tempered by both joy and pain, I felt a profound peace settle over me. The future remained unwritten, uncertain as ever, but I faced it unbroken, whole in spirit, resolute in purpose, and poised for whatever came next. The silence that settled over the house was profound. It was not the silence born of emptiness, but one heavy with meaning, a quieter kind of presence that followed storms. The echoes of confrontation, whispered accusations, and the clatter of shifting loyalties had gradually faded into distant memories. Now, in this stillness, I found a sanctuary where reflection breathed freely, untouched by the chaos of the past. The weight of solitude was not a burden, but a quiet refuge where I could finally reckon with what had been lost and what was still there to protect. The aftermath unfolded slowly, deliberately. Layer by layer, we rebuilt the foundations shaken by betrayal. Legal protections were reinforced with care, documents audited with meticulous precision, and accounts re-examined under new scrutiny. The financial fabric of the family, once vulnerable to exploitation, began to regain its strength through transparency and accountability. Each small victory in the ledger carried with it a larger significance, a tangible step away from chaos toward order. Yet the healing of the family itself was more fragile, more tentative. Relationships fractured by deceit did not mend overnight. There were cautious conversations exchanged in quiet corners, apologies spoken with humility, and wariness that softened only with time and consistent truth. Trust, always delicate, started to flicker again, not as easily as before, but with a new depth forged through hard lessons. Some wounds would never fully disappear, but the willingness to try, to rebuild, was a sign that progress was possible. Within me, the fire that once blazed fiercely with raw pain had smoothed into a steady glow. That flame, patient and unwavering, was born of justice sought not through retaliation, but through persistence and integrity. The legacy I had fought so long and hard to protect was no longer defined by the weight of material wealth alone. It stood as a testament to endurance, to the sacrifices carried silently through years of hardship, and to a resolve unbroken by betrayal. As I looked back on the path that had led here, from the quiet sacrifices behind closed doors, through the painful confrontations, to the painstaking orchestration of truth's revelation, I recognized the miles traveled. The scars left in the wake of this journey marked battles fought and boundaries redrawn. These were not mere marks of loss, but the outlines of growth. Healing, I knew, was not something forced, it was something nurtured over time. A slow weaving of new trust and understanding. In the sanctuary of my reclaimed home, a place both familiar and renewed, I whispered a simple yet profound affirmation to myself, a mantra that had been my lifeline throughout these tribulations. My worth was never theirs to claim, diminish, or deny. It was mine alone, forged in the fires of adversity, preserved by the wisdom of experience, and reclaimed through steadfast courage. This victory I now embraced was not an ending, but a beginning. It was an opportunity to rebuild, not only the tangible assets that sustained our family, but the fragile, intricate web of trust, respect, and love that defined us beyond wealth. My story, woven from threads of endurance and quiet strength, spoke to the power found in patience, in steadfastness, and in the unwavering pursuit of justice tempered with grace. Beneath the quiet night sky, surrounded by memories that bore both the sweetness of joy and the sting of pain, I felt an unexpected peace settle deeply within me. The future lay unwritten, its shape uncertain and filled with challenges yet to come, but I faced it unbroken, whole in spirit and resolute in purpose. I was poised to meet whatever would arise, armed not with rage or bitterness, but with a calm strength born of lived experience and tempered determination. As the stars watched silently overhead, I understood that life, with all its storms and calms, continued its endless rhythm. And I too would continue, shaped but not shattered, burdened but not defeated, ready for the new chapters still waiting to be written.